Let's bring in our 8 o'clock political panel. Rich Rubino is an independent political analyst. David Carlucci is a Democratic strategist and former New York State Senator. Welcome to First Edition.
Thank you.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
So, Mr. Carlucci, what did you think of Adam Schiff's questioning?
Well, I thought for her, it's the place you want to be, right? Being attacked by the left and the right. It's showing that you must be doing something right. So I think I give credibility to her saying that he thought he was doing the job of keeping it apolitical. But I think Schiff has a point. As an attorney like he is, he's talking about the fact that many people, when they're in a case, they don't recall the specific numbers or specific dates. And even in that hearing, you saw Jerry Nadler play a montage of Trump stumbling his words. He didn't recall when he was a previous marriage, what the dates were. And I think that was fair to say that Hur might have added his prejudice, his bias, his own personal beliefs to that document in calling him an elderly man with a poor memory. But ultimately, I think this is a bad day, right, for Biden in terms of the court of public opinion. But it's a real big problem for Trump in the court of law. And I think as Republicans were trying to paint it as Biden is guilty, why did you not charge him? They're making it easier for the case to prosecute against Donald Trump. But I think it boils down to intent. And that's what this hearing showed, that the intent of Biden was to comply with the Department of Justice to return the documents when he was notified. And with Trump, it was different. He was evading the DOJ. He had documents moved and then had people lie about it. And that cover-up is ultimately what's going to be the problem for Donald Trump.
You know what, David? You know I love you, David, right? but you sound like Comey right now with your intent spiel. Look, Rich, the thing is,
Yes.
When you look at her, I like the guy. He came across as likable, extremely competent. However, he acted like a DA and not a special prosecutor. Separate and apart from intent, we have clear violation of law, as Kerr pointed out. So he should not have said, well, I'm going to make the decision not to bring charges because I won't likely be able to get a conviction. That's a DA mentality, not a special prosecutor. What's your response?
Yeah, there's actually a pretty good point. It did very much come off as that. I think for the Democrats, though, specifically, if they really want to, if they want to attack him, what they can do is say that in the past he's actually given money to 3 Republican presidential candidates. It reminds me a little bit of Ken Starr, the late 1990s, when he began the Whitewater investigation, which then accelerated into the investigation into Monica Lewinsky. But at the time, they could say, well, this is someone who's past been a Republican. He was a Solicitor General in the Bush administration. The fact of the matter is it's very hard to get somebody that's completely uncolored, completely bipartisan, completely nonpartisan in this setting. So you have a scenario where many Republicans obviously were saying that he should have gone a lot further if he said what he said in his investigation about potentially Joe Biden being Joe Biden could be seen as being a sympathetic elderly man who has a loss of memory sometimes. That's certainly true, and many might perceive him that way. The other side of that, the Democrats, Adam Schiff in particular, who's of course running for a Senate seat in California this time around. So any publicity he potentially can get can help him in that Senate seat. But he's actually won. They have a jungle primary system where people run from all parties, and the two candidates then come and run in the general election. So it's him and Steve Garvey. Then once he gets to the general list, so that basically just helps him anything he can do to get in the media and certainly to help him with center left California voters. But he's able to go after him and legitimately, I think, by saying, well, if you're saying this, why did you put it in here? What was the reason for putting it in there? Why was it? What's the legitimacy? Why is this relevant? That type of thing, and it's gotten him a lot of certainly coverage. But I think in the end of the day, I think that this is probably going to be. I think this issue is probably going to be neutralized between him and Trump, and I think people are probably going to be voting more so on the issues than they are about the potential prosecution of Donald Trump or the prosecution of Joe Biden. I think we're so bifurcated and homogenous ideologically today that very few people are actually looking at kind of the intricacies of this and the Byzantine parts of these indictments or non-indictments in the case of both candidates.
You know what got me watching this hearing yesterday, and I'm sure that many viewers felt the same way, is how rude the members of Congress were to this witness. Schiff and Jay Powell in particular, they just talked over everything he said. They didn't want him to answer. Every time he started to give an answer that they knew they weren't going to like, they just said, it's my time, it's my time. I'm thinking that members of Congress in both parties, they need some lessons on manners before they have people come before them to testify. It was an embarrassment to the country.
And to your point, Betsy, Her had several heated exchanges. Here's one of them.
Yep.
So this lengthy, expensive, and independent investigation resulted in a complete exoneration of President Joe Biden. The primary law that you analyzed for potential prosecution was part of the Espionage Act, 18 U.S.C. 793E, which criminalizes willful retention or disclosure of national defense information. Is that correct?
Congresswoman, that is one statute that we analyzed. I need to go back and make sure that I take note of a word that you used, exoneration. That is not a word that
I'm going to continue with my questions. I'm going to continue with my questions. I know that the term
I ultimately reached whether sufficient evidence existed such that the likely outcome
you exonerated
would be a conviction.
I know that
did
the
not
term
exonerate him.
willful
That word does not appear in
retention
the
has a
report, Congresswoman.
Mr. Hurd, it's my time.
Is that rude or what? Can you imagine? The word exonerate was not used, but she sure didn't want the American people to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Decorum is a lesson that both sides of the aisle could use a deep lesson on. We saw that in the State of the Union. I mean, we continuously see that, and it's unfortunate, right? We want people to aspire to run for office, to be politicians, be respectful, listen to the other side. But ultimately, I think what's happening here is more of a problem for Donald Trump. I say that because, yes, the court of public opinion has been very I would say, damaging to Joe Biden, at least for now. We've got a few months to go before the general election, and this will wither away. Why? Because Joe Biden's appearance in the State of the Union, he met his mark. He went above and beyond. He showed he's got the energy, the ability to recall events, go off the cuff. And I think as we see polls coming out for now, I think that number in terms of concern about the mental acuity is going to come down. Now you've got the criminal allegations against Donald Trump. Those are going to continue. And so this is a real problem going into the general. And we saw from Super Tuesday 2, yesterday, that the problem that Joe Biden has is with the far left, with the uncommitted vote, like in Kings County, Washington State. Still, it's only about 10% of the vote that came out and voted undecided. Juxtapose that to Donald Trump, whereas, Biden has a problem with the far left. Donald Trump has a problem with the extreme middle, or the moderates. And heading into the general election, that's a problem, right? You've got to be attracting the middle, the moderates, and Donald Trump has been repelling them while Joe Biden has been moving more to the center and attracting that more of a moderate vote. And we see that in those primaries, particularly from yesterday.
But David, as far as that middle, there are many blacks, Hispanics, and other demographics that are moving away from Biden that cannot be codified within your analysis. So we have to make sure that we take that into account as well.
Right. You see 40% of the electorate has not been engaged in the contest so far. I think as people get more engaged, those traditional tendencies to go Democratic, they're going to fall back to the Democratic Party once it comes into contrast.
You assume that. You assume that. You assume that.
No,
yes.
But hold on. My time.
He thinks he's a member of Congress.
He should
now.
run for Congress.
So Rich,
Yes.
I'm going to give you the last word here.
Yes,
Close this
what's
out.
interesting in the interesting point you were making about Joe Biden's opposition on the left, it actually reminds me a lot of Lyndon Johnson. The first 2 years, the Great Society, the war on poverty, the civil rights, he was very popular. The second 2 years, he becomes enveloped in Vietnam and barely wins the New Hampshire primary and has to drop out. Luckily for Joe Biden, there was only major opposition, binder opposition in the Democratic primary. But I will say that in 2000, when Al Gore was running against George W. Bush, it wasn't successful. But the Gore campaign had a bumper sticker that said, "It's about the Supreme Court," meaning for people on the left who potentially could have voted for Ralph Nader, the Green Party candidate. You may not like Gore. You may think he's too centrist, too corporatist. But when it comes down to it, it's about who I appoint to the Supreme Court. Joe Biden could potentially do the exact same thing, say, you know, you may disagree with me on some things. When it comes down to it, if you vote for somebody like Jill Stein or like Cornel West, he'll make the case. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, that is really a vote for Donald Trump. And then he would say, he could say it's about the Supreme Court, meaning you kind of have to come on board at the end of the day, because otherwise he would say that you're wasting your vote. But that being said, Jill Stein and Cornel West will both come off and they'll say that it's not a wasted vote. And they'll say the only time you waste your vote is if you don't vote for someone who you believe in. So in many respects, Biden may be having to fight as much as he's fighting for Donald Trump on the right and for those very few persuadable voters. He's also fighting on the left to keep voters from going to Jill Stein or Cornel West.
Well, David, Rich, thanks for joining First Edition, having fun, but also
Yeah,
shedding
absolutely.
some light on the situation.
And
Yeah,
you should
it's great to
definitely
be
run
with
for
you. Thank
Congress
you.
with that decorum.
You got it.
Thank you.
All right, take care.